So there's this analyst, Arno Wellens, and if you follow his work, you know he's usually a pretty positive, constructive guy. He's often got a humorous spin on even the most complicated financial stuff. So you can imagine the surprise when he dropped this incredibly dark message about Europe's future. It really made people stop and ask, whoa, what's going on? We're going to dive into exactly what's behind his stark warning. And this was the tweet. It was so completely out of character that it felt less like an analysis and more like a distress signal. And then just as fast as it went up, he deleted it. But you can't unring that bell, you know? The question was left hanging in the air. What could possibly make one of the more optimistic voices out there say something so final? So what's really going on here? That's the mystery we're going to unpack in this explainer. Wellens builds his case in layers, kind of like peeling an onion. And to really get to the heart of his warning, we have to look at each layer, one by one. And it all starts with what he sees as some fundamental, almost absurd, errors in EU policy. All right, let's peel back that first layer. And it's a big one. We're talking about the EU's flagship policy, the Green Deal. Now, for Wellens, this isn't some debate about climate science. No, for him, it comes down to simple, cold, hard math. And from where he's sitting, the math is just dangerously wrong.
You've got to understand, Wellens was trained as an accountant. He sees the world through a balance sheet, through credits and debits. So when he looks at something as massive as the Green Deal, he sees what he calls rekenfouten, which is Dutch for calculation errors. He argues that the entire strategy is built on these really flimsy assumptions and weak evidence that when you scrutinize it, it does not up.
And he has this fantastic analogy that just perfectly captures his whole critique of the EU's energy strategy. You're throwing away your old shoes before you have new ones. It's so simple, but it really hits the nail on the head. He believes Europe is systematically dismantling its reliable working energy system with no viable replacement actually ready to go. And this slide just lays out the gamble perfectly. Europe is actively closing its coal and nuclear plants. It's shutting down its own gas production. And what's the plan? To bet the entire farm on renewable energy that, for the most part, hasn't even been built yet. And what's worse, Wellens points to new scientific papers showing that the models for offshore wind were way too optimistic. It actually delivers far less power than they planned for. And the result? Just look at a powerhouse like Germany, whose industrial base is now getting crushed by sky-high energy costs. And this thinking isn't just about energy. It extends to our food supply, too. The Green Deal has a farm-to-fork strategy that explicitly aims to produce less food. Now, the U.S. Department of Agriculture ran the numbers and predicted this could push 17 million people, mostly in Africa, into food insecurity. And the EU's official response? It was basically a press release that said prices shouldn't rise when you reduce supply. I mean, as Wellens puts it, that's not a policy, that's just wishful thinking.
Okay, so you might be thinking, all right, a few bad policies. But for Wellens, these aren't just isolated mistakes. No, he sees them as part of a much bigger, more worrying pattern. The European Commission in Brussels constantly reaching for powers that it was never, ever supposed to have.
And to really get what he's saying, we need to talk about this core EU principle called subsidiarity. It's one of the foundational ideas of the whole project. The concept is simple. Brussels should only handle things that individual countries can't, like, say, international trade deals. Everything else, especially sensitive stuff like policing and national security, is supposed to stay with national governments closer to the people. But in Wellens' view, that principle is being systematically ignored.
And his prime example is this really controversial proposal called chat control. Essentially, it would require scanning all private digital messages. He points to polling in countries like the Netherlands, where public opposition is just overwhelming. I mean, look at that. 72% of people are against it. That's not a close call. That's a landslide.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? If the public hates it, and national parliaments are against it, and it seems to fall way outside the EU's original job description, why on earth is the Commission in Brussels still pushing so hard for it?
And the answer, according to Wellens, is where things get truly bizarre. The official reason they're giving isn't about stopping crime or protecting children. No, it's to lower compliance costs for American big tech companies. The EU is actually arguing that by creating one single, very strict surveillance rule for everyone, it's solving an internal market problem. And this, he says, is the game. You take a fundamental right, you rebrand it as a commercial issue, and boom, you justify a massive power grab.
All right, so we've got bad math, we've got government overreach, and now we get to the third and final layer of his critique, geopolitics. Specifically, what he sees as a deep and really dangerous contradiction in how the West, and the EU in particular, is handling the war in Ukraine. So publicly, you have all the Western leaders standing at podiums telling Ukraine, we will have your back until you win. But in practice, Whelan's analysis shows their actions are saying something totally different. They're providing just enough older equipment to keep Ukraine from collapsing, but never enough of the modern stuff to actually let them win. And why? Because they are terrified, absolutely terrified of a Russian nuclear response. And the result is this horrific frozen conflict where people are dying every single day. And you can see this paralysis perfectly in the fight over frozen Russian assets. There is a staggering amount of money, 185 billion euros of Russian central bank funds just sitting in a clearinghouse in Belgium. The European Commission desperately wants to seize that money and give it to Ukraine. But this one issue has exposed a massive crack in so-called European unity. So here's the standoff in a nutshell. You have the EU leaders getting together and basically saying, we are all united in solidarity, and we've decided that you, Belgium, should take on all the financial and legal risk. And Belgium, quite rightly, is saying, whoa, hold on a second. If Russia sues us, we're on the hook for billions. If you want solidarity, then you all need to share that risk with us. But the other countries refuse. And for Whelan's, this just proves the unity is a mile wide and an inch deep. So after all of this, the bad math, the power grabs, the geopolitical paralysis, you'd probably think his final message is sell your house and move to Dubai, right? But this is where Whelan's completely flips the script. His ultimate message isn't one of defeatism or all. It is a powerful call to action. His point is incredibly passionate. He's essentially saying that to abandon a country with 400 years of democratic history over what he boils down to bookkeeping problems is a total betrayal of that heritage. He argues that you don't protect something precious by running away from it. You stand your ground and you fix it. And he doesn't just complain, he offers a practical toolkit for how to actually do that. First, he says, get informed. A lot of these really critical debates are happening under the radar of the big news networks. Second, engage your politicians directly. Show up, ask hard questions. And third, pressure your national leaders to use the powerful democratic tools they already have, like the veto, to block this overreach from Brussels. So in the end, that deleted tweet wasn't really a cry of despair. It was a warning flare. Whelan's ultimate point seems to be a challenge, not just for leaders, but for all of us as citizens. And it leaves us with this final, really powerful question to think about. Are these serious, yes, but ultimately fixable bookkeeping problems really enough to make us walk away from a democratic inheritance that took centuries to build?